Thanks for joining us on the Beyond Sunday podcast. Today, we're going to talk about what is the cause of division among us. Let's take a look at it.
You are watching the Beyond Sunday podcast.
Okay, so
All right, hit it.
we see division everywhere, but what do we choose to do about it, and how does it affect us? So,
Okay.
how would you define conflict, and how does it happen?
Okay. I think it's a kind of a broad definition. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we could look at. I think you could look at something as simple as a disagreement as conflict. And I think when we use the word, we hold too high of a standard for it.
Okay.
Like we end up, oh man, I got really mad. People are red-faced. There was we would use the word an argument for something like that. We split forces. We went different ways. But I think, if we break it down to brass tacks, if we say, hey, there was a point we had that we weren't on the same page. We have a disagreement. We have differing viewpoints, and we need to navigate that together. I think that suffices as a point of conflict if we're going to look at broad spectrum, because I think even those small things are going to build up over time. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like.
No, I agree, because I think conflict does not mean that we ended up fighting. It doesn't mean that
Right.
somebody
Yeah.
got swung at.
Right.
There's no black eyes. There can be. That is a bad conflict.
A little
But yeah,
or Tuesday
conflict
staff
can
meeting.
be
Could be either.
staff meeting. People get hit.
Some places, some places.
Yeah, thankfully not our staff meeting.
Nope,
But
they're virtual now. Solves a lot of that.
Yeah. Nobody's ever been hit over Zoom. But
I want to know the first story where that happens. You disappear off screen, tags a guy across on
flatten
another
somebody
house,
out.
and then go back to your own screen. Fantastic. If you've seen that, I want to know about
that's
that,
like
by the way.
cube officing, where everybody's in the same space but not.
Right.
And
Too
you
close.
say something dumb, boss comes down,
Pow.
lays one on you, walks back,
around.
pops in a camera.
Yeah.
Solid.
Good news. I think you've got a good suit against him for that one. Mm-hmm. It's caught on tape by everybody, so yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, I think conflict can be a very, very small thing.
Yeah.
That honestly, maybe a lot of us wouldn't even call it conflict.
Right. Yeah. It's not serious enough to where you go, oh, yeah, it was an issue. You would kind of blow it off, disregard it. And I think at that point, those little ones just kind of keep getting swept up under the rug. And at that point, you have a massive bump in the rug because you keep sweeping too much junk underneath there. And now you have a real conflict. And the deal is going to be that you're going to be focused on whatever the last thing was,
Right.
as opposed to, hey, we've got this entire relationship or a series of events that's been building up at this point. So when we focus on the one thing, we're at the wrong thing at that point. It
Yep.
seems obvious, but it's just been built up. But how do you think we get there? Like what causes conflict?
Well, I mean, anything can cause the smallest or largest amount or situation of conflict. Even just the reality that we have different opinions,
Yeah, that's fair.
even when it doesn't matter over little things. I mean, I think about when you're in the car with your spouse, your friend, your significant other, it doesn't matter, and you are headed to go grab a bite to eat.
Okay.
And you say, what do you want for dinner? You
Uh-oh.
pick.
This will start a fight in my house every week.
Total conflict. Almost immediately, at least for me anyway, because, for me, my wife might give an answer or say, I don't know. I don't care. You pick. I was like, okay, I mean, I gave you that one. You told me to pick. How about this?
I see the trap you're about to walk into.
Yeah. I picked. And then it's like, well, I don't want that. It's like,
I mean, I don't care as long as it's not that or this
you can pick.
or that. Your first three picks, anything but those.
Right. You can pick as long as I approve of it. This would have been easier if you had just picked.
This seems like we should hold that for a marriage podcast. That'd be a great
Probably.
one. That'd be a great one for that.
Classic marriage fights.
Classic marriage fights. Yeah.
But yeah,
send
I mean,
in your
even,
favorites.
Even things like that, they're conflicts and sometimes just, expectations, which we've talked about before.
Right. Yep.
It's like, well, I gave you the option.
Right.
Why didn't you pick?
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about is that I find for me, I'll just, kind of speak from my perspective. I think there's a couple of things that will generate it very quickly for me. One is, like you said, just on a personal thing, when there's like an emotion involved, small thing, big thing, doesn't matter. It's just a personal preference that you have. Mm-hmm. You just jump out with your personal preference very quickly. And the other thing that I see way too often is if I'm doing more talking than I am listening or asking questions. If I find that you want to share with me, something that we're going to change, organizationally, an approach to something, and if I find myself just going, okay, tell me more about that. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that? How are we going to do that? If I keep asking you questions, you'll get through the fullness of your idea. You'll get around to the point where you're going, hey, here's everything I'm thinking about this. Far too often, you give first response and you go, yeah, but, there's that first launch back. Mm-hmm. And so, again, not talking about, necessarily big dynamic fight here, but just even low-grade conflict starts happening because I have not even yet heard the fullness of your idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm already giving feedback, judgment, or,
right.
altering direction or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the beginning stages of conflict, I think that's a good point. Even a lot of times it can be caused or started or at least blown up simply from not listening fully.
That's fair.
Or not allowing somebody, like you said, when you begin to ask questions, listening well sometimes will allow you to see past some of the gut responses that you receive
right.
when you ask a question. And then when you continue to ask questions, you get a more full understanding. Whereas if you begin to respond too quickly, then you're like, well, now I have decided that the fullness of what you wanted to say was what you just said. Now I'm ready to fight you.
Right.
And it's like, whoa. There's misunderstanding here.
Right. Well, because one of the things that we've talked about a lot as a team is as we're watching a video, sitting through a teaching of some kind, reading a book, as we do our continuing education, there's always that you can be a learner or a critic. Mm-hmm. Like there's a switch. You flip one or the other. It's a bipolar switch. Just one way or the other. And I think the same thing in a conversation. As you're exchanging ideas, I'm either listening to you, and so I'm in that learner spot. Tell me more. Or you flick the switch. I'm talking now. Well, I'm a critic. I'm telling you other things. I hadn't thought about that before, but as you said that, it is kind of the similar brain mechanism that's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I've turned off the listening because I'm going, yes, but, and I want to tell you exactly what I think now. I've stopped listening to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think for me, as I think through even some of the effects of conflict that happens between us when, again, I've talked about this on the podcast, and, between the two of us, at least, we are Christ followers. And so we have a certain lens that we would look through, at least on a healthy day.
Best day, sure.
Right, that we would look through in order to walk out conflict and the reality that there is division among so many of us.
Right.
And as I was preparing for this, I was reminded in Jude 1, it actually talks about, it says that the ones who are causing divisions are the ones following after their own lusts of the flesh.
Okay.
And not necessarily that it's some like crazy thing, but internally I'm focused on me.
Okay.
Or an agenda or my own opinions, and immediately that is engaging the sinful nature of our beings, which is going to immediately start to create conflict.
Okay.
Most times.
Right.
And so in order to counteract it, we are operating and living in God's love and out of God's love in the way that we would engage a conflict or whatever. And
Okay.
so,
So, okay, if you mentioned, as Christ followers, we've got a different playbook, different way that we're looking at things. Um, I think there's a challenge that even we as Christ followers deal with is that we have conflict. Because one of the things that I think we can do a lot is that we'll try, not successfully, to overlook something, just kind of brush conflict aside, not deal with it face on. So what happens to us? What kind of impact does conflict have on us personally when it's unresolved? What do you think?
I mean, it sits and it festers, and it's a slow festering because sometimes there's such insignificant feeling things
Right?
that
Yeah.
happen, and in the moment we feel like I can look past that,
Yeah. I agree.
which means it's generally what we would label as a small deal.
Yeah, that's fair.
If you're going to choose to look past it in a moment, most times it's a small thing.
Right.
But that small thing, we didn't do anything with it. And so I still have it. Now I've put it aside, and on a good day, I'm not concerned about it.
Right.
But the next time it comes up again, or something else comes up, or a conflict with that person or somebody around that person, we seem to always have it on hand, and it comes back
Okay.
because we never actually got rid of it. And so I think it begins to fester, and it's super dangerous because it seems so small.
Right. I think that for me, as you were talking about that, I think the key for me is when you were talking about the fact that, you kind of put that aside. And I think the key is, did you actually put it aside? So again, as Christ followers, God takes a look at our sin and, he puts that aside in a way. Your sin is, as far from me as the east from the west. And so he puts it aside, and literally though puts it aside. I mean, he says that's done
Yeah.
with. And, I think we kind of half fool ourselves, go, hey, I've put this aside. Did you? I mean, if it's still in my pocket, I haven't put it aside. It's
Yeah.
melting in my pocket like a bad piece of chocolate, and it's going to be messy when I get that back out of my pocket, but I didn't really put it aside.
Yeah, there's a difference in definition for sure.
Right.
So, yeah, putting it aside, I think in our context, most times means I want to forget about it, or I want to
Yep.
move on from it.
I think that's the big deal. I want to move on from it.
Yes.
Not that I want to forget about it or forgive it, or I just want to move on from it.
Yeah, so if I choose to walk through this conflict, whatever, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Even if on a little bit, it's going to be uncomfortable. And so I'd rather not deal with it.
Right.
So we equate that is if I can get it far enough out of my eyesight or line of vision, hopefully I'll forget about it
Right.
and be able to move on.
Right. I think the problem comes is that there's still like a low level awareness that last time we engaged, I had to put something aside. It has your name on it. So next time we engage, if there's even like a difference of opinion, we're coming at things, we have different personalities on things. You just open up the file and go, oh yeah, Zach was it? Yeah, I've got a couple things with your name already on it. So I think it creates some strain in the relationship that's already there. You're operating at a higher temperature already as you're approaching a boiling point, as opposed to a better starting place. Really.
Yeah, and there's a lie that a lot of people have believed, time heals all wounds. I mean, just not true, straight up.
Not true.
You can be so mad at somebody, and when they're out of your eyesight, you're like, I dealt with it till I
Yep.
see you again. And then immediately it's like, I start
a
thinking
great
like
face.
it all comes back. And so we're not good at forgetting. And there's a process that we'll dive in a little later, talking
Okay.
about actually seeking forgiveness, which is a very different thing than forgetting
Yes.
something.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But yeah, time does not heal wounds.
Right.
Healthy process and
With that time, yes.
yeah, resolution
Right.
can help bring that. But
Right. And, I think beyond just our interpersonal thing, I think that that unresolved conflict has. I think for me, I also look at the fact that there's an internal strain that I experience regardless of whether you and I engage, or whoever you're having a conflict with, engage again, that, there's just a little strain, a little more, you have another conflict, anything that's
it
left
piles
unresolved.
on.
Yeah, they pile on. And, one of the things we would say around here is that, you have less margin. If I have a new conflict that comes in or new strains or anything else, you go, I've got margin to deal with that, internally, emotionally, everything else. But the more of those that pile up, I'm running out of margin. And then all of a sudden the smallest thing that happens comes in and you go, wow, where did that come from? I was out of margin. I'm already overlooking and setting aside all the rest of these things that I truly didn't. So, I think it has just a compounding impact for me.
Yeah, and even so on a relational scale, 1-to-1, it has a huge effect,
right,
on interpersonal relationships and working. But then as you think on a grander scale of an entire organization,
right,
you look from the top down, and a leader will set values on how things will be dealt with.
Okay.
And these things will begin to absolutely destroy culture or create a really bad one. If you have a good one, it'll destroy it, unresolved conflict. Or it begins to set the tone or set the pace for how we deal with things here.
Okay.
And so you might end up with people who are particularly good at settling conflict or walking through conflict. But oftentimes, even for myself, we're just not really that good at it usually. Because I think we don't want to be too pushy or tell people that what they think is not right or whatever it may be. And we don't know how to actually not be the exact same person and be okay with that.
Okay.
And so as I look at an organization as a whole, I think a lot of times you will see the culture as a result of the leader in it, and due to the reality that I think it's challenging, and most of us are not great at resolving conflict. Truly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Unfortunately, that's been my experience, and is my personal reality too at a lot of times.
Right.
Because it's uncomfortable.
Right.
But in the long term, it just is destructive.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, one of the things that is kind of a fallout from it, like you were saying, it destroys the culture. I think one of the things that I can imagine happening if it continues is it starts feeding in on itself, because we have conflict, we don't resolve these things. And so what you end up with is, well, I'm going to focus in on myself. I'm going to trust myself to get these things done. I'm not going to support you or what you're doing or anything else, because I may have conflict with you, or things don't typically work out when we have to work together, because you see things this way, I see it this way, and so with those things left unresolved, you end up having a collective of individual performers rather than having a no kidding team that's operating together.
Yeah. You've seen it with friends who, let's say we have a common bond, and we create a dream together where we want to start our own business, and something that is common between us. We love it. We're passionate about it, whatever it may be. We start a business. The reality is we're very different people, even though we have the same thing in common. And so then as you start adding in some real-time stress with it,
right,
of the fact that now we own a company and there's dollars, there's
right,
livelihoods at stake, there's all kinds of things in the mix. If we don't choose to resolve conflict, division, and differences, then just like what you talked about, it creates isolated pockets where we're doing our own thing on our own, and oftentimes we're going different directions.
Right. Yeah. We're not having the time to come together to share vision, make sure we have good alignment or anything like that. Yeah.
And I don't think that, as I've heard stories of it, I've never heard a good ending.
Right. Well, and this just hit my my mind that you were talking about organizations and teams and things like that. But I think in a similar way, the same kind of thing happens in like a marriage relationship or something. I mean, you start together as two people interested in each other, and then eventually you have new strains that we live together, we're married, we have kids, whatever life challenge comes up.
Yep.
So in a similar way that, your business challenges come up, if you don't resolve those conflicts as those new challenges come up, you could in a marriage find yourself with almost competing interests. You don't have shared, may sound weird, but shared vision in your marriage and things like that. And, you're two individual performers who are living under the same roof, but not actually on the same team anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the other things that, because we come from a church perspective, that is important to mention is that, we can look at interpersonal. So, if you and I start, we have conflict, goes unresolved, and it keeps percolating up, then, that can easily move into the organization for our entire team. But beyond that, then it can move into an entire congregation full of people. Because like you said, almost from a top down, as you look at leaders moving, and if leaders aren't resolving conflict, then teams, the congregation has to feel that eventually, right? Has to impact them.
Yeah, it smells, and it starts to leave an odor.
Fair enough.
The odor may come through discomfort or
Right.
like uncomfortable situations, but it stinks.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I think that'll get us going for right now as we look at divisions among us. And I think next time we're going to start looking at how to reconcile, right? All right. Well, we'll find out between ourselves here soon. We'll see you next time.
This has been another episode of the Beyond Sunday podcast. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe.